kéré o, wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, mama, Osinachi.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa, àwọn ọmọdé wọ̀nyí kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa. Wọ́n kéré sí nọ́mbà wa.
Not because I suffer fast, not because I pray and fast. No be your show, no be that. I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, I'm no qua, Osinachi. One man, Osinachi, I'm watching. Daily, Osinachi, mama, Osinachi.
Hello to everybody who's here. I will give about 5 minutes just to give people an opportunity to come and attend the panel, and then we will get started at 7:05.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Ademide.
Susan, how did you get the background?
I put the picture on my desktop. I just saved it from the email, and then
it's in
I
the
went into
email.
my settings.
All right.
Yeah. Mhm.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Hi, Ademide. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, James. Nice to finally meet you.
Exactly. Nice to see you. Nice to meet you too. Hi, Daniel.
Hello,
Hi,
Daniel.
Susan.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome,
Hello.
Corey.
Hey, Corey.
Hi, nice to see you.
Corey, we're giving everybody until 7:05 to trickle in, and then we will get started.
Sounds good. Yeah, it's early on our
I
side.
keep looking at my
It is.
timepiece when you say 7:05, Susan.
Oh, sorry, in 4 minutes.
No. Yeah, it's
Whenever
my
that is
o'clock,
for
yes.
you.
I'm wondering what's happening to me.
Right.
Am I the only one in Lagos?
Sounds so.
Can I ask the format of this? It's just like a round table, right? So are we going to be doing like throwing out like one topic and then we all kind of respond and then move on, or I don't know if
So
it was
it's really
decided yet.
it's up to you. I had thought I would present it to you, all of you, as either you can we can throw out a topic and everybody can sort of chime in, or we could do 15 minutes per person to just talk about whatever you think are the key points of applying to grad school and attending grad school in North America. Which do you prefer?
I don't know. What do you all think?
Well, I
the
would
first
rather not.
model,
Yeah.
but I can defer to people. Sorry, Ademide.
Oh, no worries. I was just going to say that maybe like rather than one person talking for a long time, we could just kind of just go down the list.
Yep.
I mean, I think some questions are probably like, should you go to a program without funding? No. Like,
Right.
we can just move on. But actually, I just heard something on a panel where somebody was like, I put together my funding, so maybe my answer is not correct.
Hmm.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I like that idea of having, topic, we all kind of respond, question, because I imagine questions will come up as we're talking. Because if I think I wrote like 5 pages of notes for this. Like it's just, there's no way that I can summarize everything in one sort of speech, so to speak. So I think it would make sense for us just to kind of go topic by topic.
Corey,
so then
you've
what
definitely
I
done
will-
your due diligence for sure.
I just like to be prepared.
That's good.
It's good. Okay, so then what I will do is I will sort of go down the list, and then if we veer to another topic that somebody raises that we deem important to discuss, we will do that. And then I'll just leave 30 minutes at the end for sort of extra questions and answers from the participants.
That's good.
Can I ask a question? So this is a weird
Please.
question. So graduate school, are we agreeing that we're not discouraging people, that everybody's asking wants to do this? Or are we allowed to be like, maybe you should reconsider? I'm happy to go with the party line if we want to be encouraging only.
Well, as the chair who is currently a lecturer, I would say that you should absolutely speak your mind on where you think academia is headed, but it's up to other panelists as well. Okay,
Yeah, I mean,
so we
I
will
had that thought.
think I
Go ahead.
probably will. I probably would campaign for more of them to join me. Otherwise, it gets very lonely. So I think that's my hidden agenda anyway.
Okay, so we will get started for in the interest of having plenty of time to discuss all that we want to discuss. So for those of you who have joined us today, welcome to LSA 2022. This is a pre-conference panel entitled Graduate School Application and Experience in North America, Perspectives from Graduate Faculty. My name is Dr. Susan Rosenfeld. I'm a lecturer in the history department at University of California, San Diego. And I will go ahead and introduce the discussants for the panel. And for those of you who are just joining us, we will raise some questions for the discussants. And then at the end, we will have 30 minutes for participants in the audience to ask questions either through the Q&A, through the Q&A, and then I will sort of field the questions. So without further ado, let me introduce the discussants to you. So Ademide Adelusi Adeluyi is an assistant professor of African history at the University of California, Riverside. Her book, entitled Imagine Lagos, Speculative Cartography and the Making of a 19th Century African City, is in press at Ohio University Press. Is it out? Not out? Okay.
It's not in press yet. Forthcoming. Let's go with that.
Forthcoming. Okay. Daniel Agbigoa is an assistant professor of African and African American Studies at Harvard University. He also has a new book this year entitled They Eat Our Sweat, Transport Labor, Corruption, and Everyday Survival in Urban Nigeria, which is published by Oxford University Press. Corey Decker is an assistant professor of history at the University of California, Davis. Her first book, Mobilizing Zanzibari Women, The Struggle for Respectability and Self-Reliance in Colonial East Africa, was published in 2014. And in 2020, she co-authored a book entitled The Idea of Development in Africa, A History, which was published by Cambridge University Press. And then last, but certainly not least, James Yeku is an assistant professor of African Digital Humanities in the Department of African and African American Studies and the Institute for Digital Research in the Humanities at the University of Kansas. His book, Cultural Netizenship, Social Media, Popular Culture and Performance in Nigeria, came out this May with Indiana University Press. So without further ado, I guess I will open up the first topic, kind of going down this list of things to discuss. So things to consider when picking a graduate program. And I suppose the way we'll do this is we'll sort of go down the list from Ademide to Daniel to Corey to James, unless you don't really have any comments, and then you can sort of pass it on to the next person. So Ademide, why don't you start us off with things to consider when choosing a graduate program?
Great. Thank you, Susan. Thank you to my fellow panelists for being here, and welcome to those in the audience. I'll keep my own remarks quite brief. I think that we were just talking about this. There are many reasons whether or not one should enter a PhD program. So assuming that one does want to do it, I think there are at least two things to consider: your intellectual reasons and also the kind of logistical, actual, tangible, day-to-day questions, right? I think the first thing you want to do is think about what you want to study and why and where. This is the US panel. So we're thinking about American universities. So I think probably the most important thing I would consider is, where do you want to do it? What school, what metro area? Who are the people in the program you want to work with. Rather than thinking of just one person, I think one should target schools where there are intellectual connections around your research, your theme, your area, so that you're not reliant on just one person who may be mobile and who will leave. The other thing is, because I teach in California, I have to mention logistical reasons, logistical concerns, especially for graduate students who are international. Can you afford to live in the place where you get accepted, right? In California right now, we're having a crisis with housing, with international students. People are really struggling to figure out how to make a living here with the cost of living and the amount of money you get in your fellowship. So I think it's really important to be strategic about where you want to go and how you're going to finish your program, and what people who are in this program, what they do in the future with this degree. So I'll stop there. Those are some things I would urge you to consider.
Thank you. Those points were actually on for me. I had here the fit and the funding. So I think it's absolutely important in terms of fit. And I also increasingly begin to think you need to consider what you want to do after the PhD program. I sort of have a bias to think that if you want to do a PhD, I think you want to think strongly about whether you want to continue on in the academia. And then, you can plan accordingly in terms of publications, getting, hitting all the sort of the marks that you need to make you successful. But if you're going to go into policy and things like that, then maybe reconsider again about the PhD and whether it's the right fit. I don't know. I just think you need to think about the end sort of game before considering the program. And then once you have that sort of end game, you can think about in terms of the fit of the program. These days, people who are going to be the president are already planning from their nursery school and strategizing, and it feels like that's what is going to happen when you're choosing a program, thinking about, because I think increasingly I see some of my students join to do whatever African studies, and over time they realize, actually I wanted to do law, and then they switch and then they realize, oh, maybe public health. I just feel that more thoughts need to be put into thinking about what you want to do. It's not that you are wooden and you can't change in the program, but it's nice to be a little coherent. And we'll talk a little bit later about what faculty appreciate when you reach out to them in terms of getting into the program. So I would say fit and link that up with career prospects, and really ask yourself whether you see yourself being an academic or whether you see yourself in a policy world, or why you want to do the PhD itself. And that could help inform the kind of programs that you do. I would say faculty of interest is important as well, in the sense that what I always do back then is to look through the list and see if I have read through the abstracts, the bios, even look at the CVs and see whether any faculty really inspires me, and that sort of nudges me to apply to that particular program. Again, we'll talk a little bit about approaching faculty before applying, but I think I would go through, even sometimes I look at the faces and I trust my instinct. Sometimes somebody's face discourages me. I just don't feel. So it's you have to trust, you have to do all this emotional work on the background that people usually wouldn't think about it. And it could be just like going through the picture and seeing which one you connect with. Almost like dating and being in a relationship. You have to connect with enough faculty to want to apply to that particular program. And of course, all this is rooted, as Demide saying, on funding. I mean, you want to, it's hard enough to do a PhD and pay out of pocket and not talk about medical insurance and all the likes that come with it. And if you're international students applying for visa, which is enough stress, I feel like they should tack on some years for international students who have to apply for visa, because it's not a fair game with students here, because you carry that burden, and sometimes you reach the international office that applied for visa, they don't even have enough. You have more information than these bunch. So it's important to think then about funding opportunities in addition to housing and the likes. And maybe that could be strategic location. Maybe you want to choose a program in DC because there's enough opportunities to get paid internships, things like that on the side. Think about the side hustle for sure, in terms of thinking about these programs. And for me personally, a program that did not offer funding opportunities was a no for me. I wouldn't go into that. But that's my take. I'm sure others have their view.
These are really great suggestions. I would echo each and every one of them, and especially the question of funding for international students at a lot of public universities like the University of California. Students who are citizens can establish residency in the state, and their tuition goes down. And so it becomes sort of easier for the Department of Program to fund them. And for international students, your tuition and fees at a place like University of California remain the full amount throughout your entire time in the program. So it becomes very, very difficult for the Department of Program to come up with funding to cover that. So make sure you get that commitment from the department that they will cover your tuition and fees, and of course provide other sorts of funding. We'll get to the funding question later, but that's a really big thing to consider. Yeah, there's so many. I mean, I want to just echo a couple of things, and then I have a couple of my own things to add. One thing I think is really important that I think Demide said is to really think about a kind of group of faculty that you could work with at the place that you're looking at. So, you know, if you're thinking of applying to a program because there's one individual that you know you want to work with, you really want to kind of dig a little deeper, look at other people in the field and outside the field, people who you might connect with thematically, and kind of think about what sort of, you know, what kind of community could you build of mentors at that institution. And maybe there are people outside the department that you're applying to as well. And, you know, when it comes time to contacting people, you want to think about that kind of short list of multiple faculty that you're considering, because you will need multiple mentors as you go through the process, the program. The other thing I would say is really kind of going back to this question of, we're assuming, you know, everyone here wants to apply to graduate school. And I would say, really think very deeply about that question, because if you are not intensely passionate about what you want to study, then, you know, it's going to be a slog and it'll be really difficult to kind of maintain that commitment. And so, you know, really kind of think about, and of course your intentions, your goals, and your interests may change in the program as you go through the program, and that's to be expected to a certain extent. But if you're thinking about it as a sort of career move, but you're not necessarily very passionate about it, that's going to be a big challenge, right? So I would say just pick something that you have a lot of investment in when you're thinking about a particular program, and also what you might do with it. As Daniel said, thinking about kind of what career, what's the end game, what are you thinking of getting out of this, right? If you have kind of an intention of going into a tenure track academic position, you know, these are very competitive, these are very difficult, right? So thinking about, you know, how can you imagine a kind of broader set of career goals, and which, you know, how then you can prioritize them after that. Yeah, I think those are my main. Oh, one other thing I would say is, you know, when trying to pick which program to apply to, you know, a lot of people rely on the question of a track record. You know, such and such university pumps out, you know, so many PhD students every year. And that's, you know, usually a good indication, especially if those people get jobs, you know, and that's what you want to do. If they get jobs in academia and that's what you want, that could be a good indication. But programs change, people retire, you know, so things, 1 year it might be different than the next, right? So really think about, you know, you look at the track record, but also, you know, look at what programs are actively recruiting, because there might be new funding or newly tenured faculty, or something that an institution that is really actively seeking out to build their program in ways that kind of the old track record programs may not be investing in. So.
I think everyone has said some of the things I could have said. So I'll just keep it very brief and say, I like to begin by asking people to focus on themselves before they think about a program. For me, it starts with yourself, basically understanding what you want to do and constructing some kind of research brand. If people do not mind my using that word, coming from the neoliberal understanding of the university space, but really the point is to understand your research as some kind of brand and make it sellable. And for me, that involves basically curating yourself in such a way that people want to work with you. So for me, it always starts with the person who wants to get into a graduate program. What exactly do you want to do? And where's the best place that fits the goal you have in mind? But I cannot overemphasize the place of self-curation. What exactly are you invested in? What is your interest? What do you want to do? Because sitting down to immerse yourself in all of those pre-program, explorations you're interested in would help you, would make the process really easy. So when somebody sends a link and says this university is recruiting, you know what you want to do already. You could say, oh no, this is not for me, because you have already started them to say this is what I want. If you don't know what you want, a whole lot of things might become a distraction. You might just end up in a place that doesn't necessarily help you achieve your life and career goals. So I would say, please curate your brand. Know exactly, and by brand I mean your research brand. Your research identity might be a better way to put it. What exactly are you interested in? And I think all of those would drive whatever you do eventually. And perhaps something I don't know if a lot of people spoke about is the issue of timeline and completion rates. Most universities in the European system will get a PhD done 3 years, perhaps 3 to 4 years. In the North American system, it's a bit different. You're talking about people, PhD taking like 6 years on the average. If you're coming with that UK, paradigm in mind, you might be in for some shock to know that you can get your PhD done in 3 years or 4 years if you choose a school in the US or Canada. I had my PhD in Canada, and I was excited to be done in 5 years, but I thought that was quite fast because a lot of people in my program were done 7, 8 years, 9 years. So you really want to sit down to ask yourself this question: do I really want to go to departments where the average completion rate is like maybe 8 years or 7 years? And I know that there are a lot of factors that shape these things, but again, to go back to the place of self-curation, self-understanding, knowing what you want to do, how you want to do it, and where you want to do, all of those things matter. And I think they will also shape the questions that would come later. Suzanne?
Thank you. Okay, so for the sake of time moving forward, just so we can sort of get through as many questions as we can here, let's try to limit answers to like 3 minutes, if that's possible, just so we can sort of hit the key points and then people can elaborate during the Q&A. So the next question is, what are admission committees looking for in your application dossier? So when you submit an application, what are you submitting and how are committees evaluating it?
Okay, so this is a really interesting question that's kind of system specific. So I can speak about a public university, the University of California. There's an intellectual part of the package. What is your idea? What do you want to study? Very often, I've seen 2 types of applications: people who want to do African history, which is my specialization, and my other specializations, urban history, GIS, cartography, other things. Sometimes when an application comes to me to be reviewed, I want to see that there is some overlap, at least, with what I'm interested in. Nigeria is usually not enough, because if you're doing Northern Nigeria, 20th century, I'm not really the person for you, as someone who does 19th century Lagos. But at the same time, if you're expansive in your thinking, I think that those are the applications that are often very successful, because people can see that your idea has legs and it can grow. But if you only have one very narrow thing you want to do, you'll very often find that your idea has to change, has to be flexible, you have to be open, I think. So intellectually, I think that we look for interesting ideas with potential. In the American system, people with initiative, it's going to take a long time. This is a long haul process, especially for historians. I dare say our average is 7 for the very fast, or maybe 5. And then also the other thing is, in your application, we also have things like diversity statements and other things that are kind of California specific. So, but what I would say is, use the most care you can to craft your application. I think committees want to see that you're actually invested and this is a place for you. You don't have to know everything about the program, and you can look through, as Daniel said, demonstrating some familiarity with what the school does, what their strengths are. So if you were to apply to my program, if you knew the strengths are public history, a little bit about urban stuff, a little bit about other things, your application will stand out because we see that you're somebody who could fit not just with one faculty member, but with a range of people. So, be bold, be yourself, don't misrepresent yourself. And I think that the most interesting applications I've seen, which doesn't mean you will be the right fit. I think the thing to remember is that fit is important, fit is ambiguous. So any rejection or other things are not often about quality, but often about understanding if this is the program for you according to the understanding of the committee. So I would stop there and say that, you should think very broadly about how you frame yourself and demonstrate some care and interest. The least interesting applications I see are the ones that seem very generic. Hello, I'm addressing this and I'm sending the same application to everybody. So I would stop there.
Thanks. I'll just add a couple of things. The first is recommendation letters. I've seen a few instances now where the student does some of the things that Ademide is talking about there, which is central. But here at Harvard, we take the recommendation letters seriously, and seriously, I mean, if you have there's a question about rank the students that you're recommending. Top 1%, top 3%, top 5%. It doesn't matter what you write, let's put it this way, in your application, how creative, how nice it is. If the person who is recommending you is ranking you in the top 5%, you're not going to get in. Or if the person who is recommending you just writes a 1 page or half a page, it's like the question that keeps coming in the admission committee, and I've been part of it over the last 3 years, is if they're not willing to stick their neck out to you, then we cannot do it. So it's important to choose carefully whoever is recommending you and making sure that it's someone who will do justice. And I can talk later about strategies to go about it. But absolutely, you want to be aiming for someone who is putting you in the 1% and leaving nothing on the table for you, especially if you're trying to get into the R1 universities.
Yeah, I would add that, when we're reviewing applications, we're looking for people who can come in and have a really good chance of success. So what does that mean? It means that they're already set up in some ways. They already have either some research experience, they have a deep knowledge or some experience of the language and culture in the place that they're studying. They have some experience with writing and sort of doing research and working perhaps with a faculty member in the field. So it doesn't necessarily mean you have to come in with fully equipped to go and start your dissertation, but if you're starting from zero, right? I haven't studied, let's say, for example, African history is the field you're applying to. I haven't studied history. I've never traveled to the place that I want to study, want to research, or, I don't have any research experience. That's going to be a little bit of a challenge, right, for us to think about, your success in the program. And of course, the point of the purpose of the graduate program is to train. So we expect that there will be some training involved, but it would be, but it's always really useful to think about somebody who's really thought about and had some experience in what they're doing. And this idea of, I think James was talking about building a research identity or research brand for your application. I think that's really, really smart, especially if it's based in actual experience, right? So that's where you can kind of, even if it's different from the research experience, your research idea for the areas you want to explore will be different. But if it's based in experience that you've had already, then it becomes more grounded, right? It becomes more kind of realistic. And yeah, I think there was one other thing I was gonna say, but I forgot. So I'll stop there.
Just to pick it up from there, I would add that it's important you also suggest some flexibility when you contact grad supervisors. You don't want to give the impression that you won't be needing whoever your mentor will become. I mean, you want to be trained in this program. So despite having some kind of research identity that's solid, that's well articulated, I think it's still important to come in giving a sense that you want to be trained and mentored. That it can put somebody off if they got this impression that you're not the teachable kind of person. So on the one hand, it's important to have an idea of what you really want to do, to have a sense of where you're going. You have a trajectory. You seem to be, well, you know how to do the basics. Your research, your writing is excellent, and your writing will become immediately evident when I get the first email. Your creativity will be immediately evident when I see you on Twitter announcing to the world that you have just finished a particular program and you're looking for a lab that does this. You know, people do all sorts of things today. I can immediately know that this is a creative grad student. I want them in my lab. So there are a lot of things people could do, right, to signal their competence. On the other hand, you also want to, keep things flexible. And Ademide was getting at this earlier. You want to be able to suggest that your research interests overlap with mine, and that I'm in the best position to help. Not necessarily to infantilize anybody, but of course to help them, get the best out of themselves. So I would just emphasize that aspect of flexibility. I think it's really important. Susan?
Thank you. Okay, so part of the application is writing the statement of purpose, which some of the panelists sort of touched on. So in terms of writing your statement of purpose and then also submitting writing samples, which you will be asked to do as part of your dossier, what is the advice of the panelists on how to write the writing sample, or how to choose your writing sample, and how to sort of go about writing your statement of purpose?
Okay, I guess I'm up again. This is a tough one, I think, because I've learned that so many schools are different. I think the writing sample is probably easier to answer. You want to be an academic, and this is also field specific. So if you're going into a history program, you want to develop a writing sample that shows that you are interested in history, change over time. You have ideas that are anchored in place and time and are really interested in certain kinds of things and have potential. You don't have to be perfect, but you do have to demonstrate that you are somebody who can enter the program and can, like James said, be mentored. I don't have to teach you how to write. That would be, I think, a writing sample that would stand out. Now, it doesn't have to be, the stakes keep getting higher. I don't necessarily think it has to be something published, but perhaps publishable, right, would be the key in this sense. Your statement of purpose, I think, is trickier, right? Many of us would assume that, yes, you do want to be a traditional academic, you want to do that. For historians, I think the challenge would be, why are you doing this work? Why does it matter? And how are you going to do it? Like, what are your ideas? For us, if you have something interesting about sources, about populations, about people, we always ask the big question, like, why is this important and where is this going to go, at least intellectually? And can you develop an argument? You will be taught skills, of course, when you enter programs, at least in the really good programs, but there has to be something there to build on. So I would say that your purpose should be clear as a scholar, as a person, who you are, and why you're ideally situated to do this kind of work. Academia is changing, at least for historians. We're not that disembodied voice that knows everything anymore, but people are taking people are doing more interesting work now, at least in my field, and thinking about positionality, about race, questions about identity in African studies, where really African studies is really changing, at least from my field. So if you're a person who's aware and committed to these kinds of new questions, I believe that your statement will really stand out. So it's not about a personal biography per se, but why are you doing this work and why now? And who is it going to impact in that sense? I don't think we're stuck in the ivory tower anymore or stuck in the archive one place anymore. Things are changing. I want history to matter. And will you join that conversation? So I think one has to think carefully about why. And your statement of purpose is an important opportunity for you to really demonstrate why you should be the person to do this work and how you think you will accomplish it and how your ideas will change.
I echo everything that Ademide is saying there. I should say that in the US system, it strikes me because I came, going back to what James was saying, they came from the UK, Australian system into the US system. And I must say, I've read some of the most creative statements of purpose here. People can begin with a rose flower and end with a major historian. It's like, really, the stakes are really high. And I'm thinking my SOP was really dry and boring. So I would say just on the merit of what I see from the applications is that you have to be a storyteller. And you have to attain what I typically calls a balance of stories, which means you have to present the personal, the social, the academic. You have to give us a flavor. I don't want you citing quotations and whatever. I don't want that. What I want to see is even a nice little vignette that opens it up. And again, this could be different for different fields, but this is things that I find exciting. One has a little personal story or a little thing that strikes you that then opens the door into what you want to do and why it is important, answers that question, and creativity. And I think a well-written SOP would hold true in history, will hold true in anthropology. If you read it, it will leave an impression on you, and I think it will be good. So I think about the personal, think about the social, think about the academic, think about attaining a balance of stories when you write that story, so that one finish reading it and doesn't think, oh, it's just purely academic or it's purely this, but gives an integrated sort of view of you as the person. And then in terms of writing sample, I'll say pick a writing sample that best complements your SOP. What work are you most proud of that is a fit for the program? So for example, if I'm applying for a program in transport studies, it's not the most appropriate to pick something on whatever gender and power that doesn't have any direct link to that. So pick a topic on that you've written similar to transport that shows, the fit to it. So I would think relevance is very important in terms of writing sample. And pick a writing sample that you're most proud of, not necessarily because it's the one you got funding for, but the one you really, really think it could be published somewhere that is not prestigious, but the one you really think is you're most proud of, I think, is the one you put forward. And keep it short. Don't pick a huge writing sample. Short and sweet is always good. So I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, these are my colleagues' suggestions are really great. I would only add that when you're thinking about so there are multiple things that you might have to do for an application. You might have to do a writing sample, a statement of purpose, and you might also have to do a personal statement, right? So if you're thinking about really talking about where you come from and your interest and passion and why you're applying to this program, that might go into a personal statement, whereas a statement of purpose might be, what is your research experience or what is your coursework experience and how are you envisioning it expanding into this graduate program. So so thinking about sort of the logistics of spelling out those different pieces. And all of those pieces should fit together, right? So your personal statement, your statement of purpose for research, and your writing samples should all be sort of, if you look at them together, you can see the whole picture, and you can see, okay, this is what they've done, this is where they're coming from, this is where they want to go, these are the skills they already have, this is, what they want to expand on, right? And you can really see all, how it would work in the program. So thinking holistically about all those different pieces of the application, and then also the DEI, if you have a DEI statement or a diversity statement in addition, that is also, one of those pieces of the puzzle. The other thing I would say is just, have other people look at all of your writing, all of your statements, your writing sample, everything before you submit, and give yourself plenty of time to do revisions before you submit them. I mean, often we think of, oh, writing sample is a paper I wrote for one of my courses or something. I'm just going to take this paper and submit it. No, I mean, you can revise it before you submit it with your application. It should be a reflection of, your best writing, right? I'll stop there. Thanks.
I think something else we might add just to close this could be the idea of, again, being innovative and creative. And Daniel, mentioned this very well. Be very creative in your statement of purpose. And I remember this news item from last week. A guy contacted some trumpet player in the US saying, I want to come under your mentorship. I am the best trumpet player in Afghanistan, and I know because there are just two of us. And this guy in the US had to pause to read this particular introductory line because it piqued his interests, right? So there's something about the statement of purpose that immediately signals how innovative and creative this particular candidate will be, right? You want to make sure you are different. You want to signal that very, strategic idea of difference from the word go. And again, for me, it's part of this idea of knowing exactly what you want to do and clearly articulating why you are a fit for the program. The thing about most graduate programs I've found is that they also are interested in candidates who will come in and make their department visible somehow. People will do strong research to get grants for the department because there are these financial, back ends to these things, right? The best grad students actually become leverages for some programs. And we need to talk about that too. So are you the kind of PhD student that would come in and showcase the department? You want to be able to say, yes, I am that kind of person from your statement of purpose or intent, as they call it in Canada. And I think I should say that some Canadian universities actually want you to write a proposal from that application stage. You're not doing a statement of purpose or intent. You're actually doing a mini proposal, which they expect you to build upon later. So if that's the model you'll be working with, you also just want to pay attention to having a solid research idea, something that's relevant. And I like what Corey said, get people to read what you have put together, and getting as many input as possible would be really helpful. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. So I guess we should tackle the issue of funding. So I want to kind of combine two of these questions that the panelists have been given to have you all talk about both funding for graduate education. So, what does it mean to be funded to go to graduate school or not funded? And how do you make a decision based on that? But then also sources for external funding for field work. So sort of thinking about both of those and talking to both of those. Demide, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, if somebody else wanted a chance to go first, I'm happy to go second or third or last.
Do you want to bail out?
Oh.
Do you want to be...
Oh, I'm happy to do this. Oh, totally. Okay.
No, I know you keep going first anyway, so I'm happy to go second if you want me to.
Okay, fine. I will say what I have to say then. Oh,
yes.
James, was that you? Oh no, Daniel. Okay, fine. Okay, so I had an answer for this until I went to a panel this morning. So I think personally that if you're coming to the United States, a school has to demonstrate a commitment to you, just like James said, right? So this means to me that you should only go, in my opinion, to a program where you're guaranteed at least 5 years of funding for that will also match the cost of living for your program. If they're telling you you have to, compete for funding, we'll give you 2 years, you'll figure something out, I would assume that program, you're not their top choice, or they cannot support their top choices. So for me, unless you're independently wealthy or money is not a problem for you, a PhD is a long-term thing, and the money is really important. And money that could maybe work in your first year or two may suddenly not be, and with inflation the way it is now, the money that might last or might work in year 1, year 2, year 3, or 4 looks very different or feels very different in year 5. So if someone were to ask me, I would say unless you're fully funded for at least 5 to 6 years, and if you have to travel, including the summer, I would not go to that program. So at the same time, I would think that for me, when I talk to students who want to go to graduate school, I would say, go to the best program that will invest in you, right? So it's not always about prestige. It's not always about, you have to find your own balance, but you need a clear investment in yourself. Otherwise, you will not be able to finish. The attrition rates are really high. So someone like myself who does research in West Africa and who also has to go to Europe for archival research, I would like somebody to pay for that, right? So this is a really important question. Sometimes your school, if you're lucky, will fund you to go at least for the exploratory years. But eventually, as you discover more things, it's going to be really important to pay for that, pay for conferences. America is really expensive. And so you don't want to rack up credit card debt. You don't want to, I don't think you want to rack up more debts, student loans, things like that, even if you can. So it's really important so for historians, once you've passed your exams, once you've identified your sources and where you have to go, then you start looking for things like the SSRC, the ACLS. I'm happy to talk about sources. You can actually find this, but there are lots of places to fund research, travel, and then writing completion, because you have to move away from, I think, only teaching and actually focusing on writing so that you can pivot to what you want to do after you finish.
Yes, I think it's really simple for me with funding. Funding is in many ways the yardstick for selecting a guaranteed funding, I should say, is the yardstick for selecting a program. And sometimes what I would say is that potential grad students shy away from going for the top tier universities or going for universities that have guaranteed funding, maybe thinking maybe the application will not go through, or for whatever reasons. I would say if the guaranteed funding is in Yale, whatever, go for it. And because there are different combination of factors that can mean that you might be the right candidate for that. So, but I would absolutely say, given the cost of living, go for it. But I think I just want to be mindful of the fact that it's not always the case that you see the path clearly to guaranteed funding, and sometimes the funding is 2 years. And I think since maybe my head is too much on studying uncertainty, I would give a different side to what Ademide have said there, and say, personally, as much as I'm campaigning for guaranteed funding, if I get 2 years, I might take a chance, because I just believe in possibilities and believe when you are in the program, you can think of other creative ways. You can be resourceful. I've seen too many stories of people who went in 2 years and found a way, fashioned a way for themselves, made a case, because within 2 years, you can strengthen your case, even though you might not be the favored students coming in. Maybe then you will show them that actually you made a mistake in that decision, and I'm actually a major asset to this program, and things can then revise from within. And you can keep going to the scholarship office and making sure that they know your face pretty well, and be a nuisance to them, so they'll figure out a way. these universities have money and they should be able to fund someone. So I would say allow for the space of possibility and uncertainty, which sometimes can be a resource itself. But definitely see some part of the program clear. See that you have some funding. And then, what is the worst case scenario that can happen? You pause your PhD program and take a chance sometimes. I'm just saying that because it's hard. Some people are not in a position of that guaranteed funding. They have partial funding, and then do they let that go, or do they take that chance and hope for the best? So I think I'm on the uncertainty part a little bit, if you can get the assurance of the guaranteed funding.
So I was exactly that student, Daniel. I came into my program with very, very, very little funding and sort of scrambled and made my way. And but I also, I was eligible for a lot of funding because I was a citizen, right? So that's the other thing. I think getting knowledge and information about, what grants are available, what are the eligibility requirements. My main suggestion for this question is really just ask all the questions, right? Ask everybody you can about how funding works. Sometimes even if you get this beautiful 5-year packet, there's like, here's funding, guaranteed funding for 5 years. And it looks, the bottom line numbers look really big. They do this in our department, and it's so confusing because students get the letter and they're like, wow, this is great. I get $50,000. No, you don't get $50,000. Like, 30 of that is going to tuition, 10 of it is going here and that, what's actually in your pocket at the end of the day, and then taxes come out, right? So ask all the questions about what can I expect to take home at the end of the day, every month or every semester or whatever it is, right? Because those funding offers can look very confusing, and the people who put them together for you, the grad director or whoever it is that you're talking to, they know exactly how this works, so they can explain it to you, they can break it down for you. And then ask about all of the other opportunities. Does the grad studies program at the university offer its own set of grants and, competitive grants, and small and large, whatever? Does, the department have other competitive grants I can apply for? Do you have a list of external funding, that I can apply for, and the eligibility requirements? I mean, the university, if they're set up well, should be able to direct you to those resources so that you can make your decision about whether or not to take that gamble, and whether or not, and not sort of just rely on, oh, I've got this document with large numbers on it, all right, I'm good, right? Because it might mean something very different when it comes to your take home.
And sometimes, to be honest, your take home doesn't take you anywhere, and it's just what it is. You have to you have to basically wrestle with having the money in your pockets not necessarily being able to sustain you. There are a lot of PhDs in the US whose eventual income is way less than the average minimum wage, and it's crazy. You have to find a way to survive. Again, because Canada was my own graduate program contest again, I kept drawing from that particular framework. I know that when you apply to a Canadian university, you're granted funding for PhD. Not so for masters, but for PhD, it's a given. But again, there are other external opportunities and grants you can always apply to, and in many cases you get those. And the beautiful thing about Canada is that you can always say become a permanent resident in 2 or 3 years before you finish the PhD, and that changes your financial situation, right, in a very drastic way. So, I mean, just echoing what everybody has said, and to add that if you don't have money, please don't go to grad school. If you don't have guaranteed funding, please maybe just don't go. And if you do want to go, take the uncertainty path like Daniel advised, I would say that the possibilities of change in the future would have been signaled at the beginning. A school that is willing, that would be open to some kind of negotiation later. So I think that's the middle point between what Ademide said and what Daniel said. If I want to, take the partial funding. I should take it if I know that this school has money and will give me because of the fact that I would have proven myself. And really, we should try to go into the program, knowing we have so much to prove, not to the institution, first of all, but to yourself. You want to have a fulfilled career. You want to pursue knowledge for its sake. You want to do something with your life. And I think the system has a way of rewarding all of those, right? So that's it for me.
Great. Okay, so we have about 6 minutes before Q&A. I'd like to try to make it through one more question. Basically, thinking about comprehensive examinations and forming dissertation committees, most importantly. So what is your advice on how to form a dissertation committee once you're in a program, and then how do you sort of think about that in relation to your comprehensive exams and writing up the dissertation and all of that?
Okay, me again. So I can talk about my own system and how it works. My experience has been, because I teach graduate classes, the students that are drawn to me to be on their committee are either because of the geographic area or the time period or something about method, right? So what I'm trying to say is that when you pick classes, when you select classes, at least in my system, we have the flexibility where you can take classes not only in your local campus, but also in many of the UC campuses. So you can use taking classes as an opportunity to reach out, meet people, form connections across communities. I went to graduate school in New York, and this meant that we had a consortium and we could take classes at different universities. So I think that if you're strategic in the classes that you take, you can really broaden your network and also get to know people, people's styles, people's interests, people that will mentor you, people who will take an interest in you. That's the way I've seen committees being formed. So of course, there's often a one point person who, this is the person who inspires you or who you're really interested in. But also if you can't take a class with somebody, just write to them. I mean, chances are, so I will be optimistic now, chances are you will write to this incredible scholar and they'll respond to you, and then you'll really mesh with them and they could end up being on your committee, or at least somebody who will mentor you through your career. So I think that you should look at classes and your location as an opportunity. And the fact that we're in the Zoom world, you can reach out to people. And actually, one of the things that graduate students have told me is that people have been responsive. Faculty who you may be intimidated by, who think they're too important to speak to you. Most of the best scholars want to meet, nurture, and invest in students. So a person who is interested in a legacy or the future will likely respond to you. Nobody is too important to speak to anybody else, I think. So, your committee is an opportunity for you. Your comprehensive exam is an opportunity for you to really broaden your scope. And if there are things that you're not interested in yet, perhaps taking a class, take a chance on a class, maybe you'll broaden your mind. So I think that your committee represents your state of mind while you're trying to frame your dissertation. And for me, I was very fortunate to meet really wonderful people like Sahida Derinto and Abosede George in making my own dissertation committee. And they've made a really dramatic impact, not only in the way I think, but also in the opportunity that I've come across in my own career. So I'll stop and say, your committee is an opportunity. Your exams are an opportunity. And I think you should think expansively about it.
Just a quick note on what Ademide said. When you reach out to the faculty, you might not get an answer. And maybe I'm partly guilty in this as well. But don't lose heart if you don't hear anything. It's silence. I think you could be the second time or third time lucky. Politely reach out again and politely reach out again, and maybe that's the time that they would respond. So I think just have a little bit of a thicker skin and try again. The other thing is that the assembly of the committee should reflect the strength of your work. I mean, try to pick faculties that can create can have a creative tension within them, that brings various perspectives is good. It's like you're doing different angles of the project, depending on what project you are doing. And here in Harvard, students sometimes go to MIT and pick a faculty from outside that complements the one inside. So there are different sort of dynamics that you could use. But what is most important, as far as I'm concerned, is making sure that the faculty that you pick reflect the robustness of your work. I mean, if you're doing something on Africa and you pick a bunch of faculty that have a sort of remote grounding in the context, it's not useful. It's not some questions in terms of the enriching the work itself. Some questions will be off the table. So you want to picking a robust faculty means as well that you cover up for later questions that may emerge in the course of your work. In terms of the comprehensive exam itself, the only point I would say over the last few exams that I've done, I have seen grad students that stay within their comfort zone. And I have seen part of the committee's push has been in comprehensive exams an opportunity to demonstrate that little uncertainty, that little creativity to think outside the box, and not just to be so proper, so well put together, but to show an excitement around your project, that you're looking at literatures that sometimes are outside the usual ones, and then you're bringing that in conversation. I think that's sort of the feedback we've given over the last 3 committees that I've been in, that they've just been too rigid is the word. So again, a robust committee can help you in that direction, to push you in dynamic ways.
That's such a great point. I mean, I was thinking about that as well. I mean, when you think about the comprehensive exam committee, and in our system, the comprehensive exam committee is different than your dissertation committee, and part of that is because the comprehensive exam committee, if you're thinking about, career in academia, for example, is designed to develop your teaching fields. Like, these are the fields you can expand into as your broader kind of scholarly identity. And your dissertation is really, your in-depth study of one particular area, right? So the exam committee in particular is an opportunity to think more expansively, to think broadly, to think comparatively, to think creatively, and using coursework as a way to connect with people, but also try out some of those different methods or comparative ideas, or work that you wouldn't necessarily think about doing if you were only focused on your one research idea, right? And that's the difference, I think, between kind of the 2 kinds of committees. For the dissertation committee, which sometimes overlaps with your exam committee, right? This is also a way for you to think about, who's gonna give me really helpful mentorship. So there's a kind of personal relationship side to that, as in addition to who can kind of introduce some intellectual questions that I wouldn't otherwise consider or think about or be exposed to if I was only working within my narrow field, right? So think of these as opportunities, and your coursework is really the best way to explore those opportunities and to try out things like writing papers that might become, the little seed of the idea that might lead you ultimately to your dissertation topic, right? Those are really just your opportunity to explore all of the different creative ways that might end up defining who you are as a scholar.
The comprehensive exam for me is something we really need to get out of the way as quickly as possible. I've seen people who just drag their feet and refuse to tackle that particular aspect of their training as soon as possible. And I think that that's not too good for their program, because it's this thing you do that immerses you in the field itself. It gives you the most robust and expansive knowledge of your field. So you should embrace it. You should want to do it. Having come out of the comprehensive, you come out smoking, if you like. You come out really, that's when some of the most generative ideas become produced. At least that was my own experience. And I've seen that for most PhDs, the comprehensive exam was that time they really had time to do some serious reading. Every other reading you do afterwards probably builds on it. notes from my comprehensive exam 7-8 years ago are still somewhere. I probably have some notes here in my drawer. I I had some flashcards, I had some system I had to use, and I'm just saying it's a time to really get things done, and you should embrace it as quickly as possible. The last thing I do want to say, because of time, is the constitution of the committee itself. I like the idea of getting people who will mentor you, will give you feedback, but I think I should also note, and I don't know if somebody said this, but it's good you have somebody who doesn't agree with some of your best ideas on your committee sometimes. Daniel called it a creative tension. The guy or the person who is the agent of that creative tension most of the time doesn't think you're doing something worthwhile, not in a negative sense, but you will have to spend the next couple of years knowing that there's somebody on that committee who would push back at your strongest ideas. So for instance, you think we should burn down the archives, we should just collect the money of the white people, but decolonize everything. And there's this guy who is an Africanist, who is from, say, Ghana, like you're from Nigeria, who say, no, this decolonization idea is a fad, you need to criticize it. And you're just like, what the hell is wrong with this black guy? We should decolonize everything, but he doesn't agree. Those kind of people, you need them too. So for me, I would always treasure a committee that has, both the supporters and those people who also, well, not necessarily opposers, but people who would really give you, the best of challenge to your most valuable ideas. They're usually worth it, if you ask me. Susan?
Thank you. Okay, so I invite any audience members to submit any questions that you may have either in the chat or in the Q&A. And then I will field them. And for the panelists, we don't necessarily need to go in order. Whoever feels as though they would like to answer can answer. So I'm sort of looking at who has asked questions so far and who is still here to hear the answers. So one of the questions that came up in the chat was, how long should the recommendation letter be? And perhaps we can sort of think about that in terms of, how to know whether the person you're asking to write you a letter will be, writing for you as sort of putting themselves out there, putting their necks on the line for you. So I will open the floor to whoever wants to answer.
I think this is it's a tricky one, because I've seen students who are excellent, and then you read the recommendation letter and somebody actually says passing comments like, she's not necessarily the strongest, but it's like those comments like that can be damaging to them, and it's hard from your own perspective to know which professor is going to put that line in. But in terms of the recommendation that I've said, well, the way I would think about it is, have I done my due diligence in giving this person enough information about myself? Because in the end, you are your own best ambassador. So what I would do is I would try to spoon feed them as much as I can, give them materials that they can use. So I could, like, if I'm applying, I could say, I'm applying to law school, here's points. I could even have chunks of like paragraphs of aspects of my own life that I think are best fit for a law school and why I want to do it and what questions you want to see. I could give them internships that are most relevant. I could, instead of just giving them like a CV, just do like a resume where you give summaries, blocks, or something, because they are helpful. Because the more information then you give, I look at those informations in addition to my own perspective, and then you avoid somebody writing. And I think this is notoriously something that I also peculiar to West African recommendations that come, that sometimes I get only a paragraph. Like, and I think it's just like generic paragraph that really flattens the whole mood of the students. So I think it's important that one way of getting around that is giving this information, feeding this information enough so that the person writes at least a page. Because I just don't think a paragraph cuts it for me in terms of somebody applying for grad school.
As a matter of fact, I belong to a school of thought that believes recommendation letters in terms of their production should involve both the recommender and the students. So sometimes I write a recommendation letter and I actually send it to you first to look at it. Does this represent you the best? So if it's just a single paragraph and you know the stakes that exist, you probably want to protest and say, could you add this? Could you say this? Could you say this? Right? Because the recommendation letter for me is really important. And I think a lot also comes down, especially from the West African thing, a lot comes down to the culture of recommendation writing itself, especially in the UK context and the European context versus the North American context. In the North American context, you want to sell yourself. You want to, I found myself writing some recommendation letters and I probably had almost 10 paragraphs. It was about 2 or 3 pages for a candidate. And then in the UK context, I know that would be an overkill, right? If I were to write a letter for somebody going to, say, University of Kent or somewhere. So how to balance all of those is also really important, right? And my take is just to make sure that whoever is writing your letter is somebody that wants the best for you, the person who is rooting for you the best, and who would sell you basically. And again, I'm sorry, I'm not in support of the idea of the neoliberal university, but I keep using words like sell, sellable, brand, because for me, it comes down to the ability to communicate your difference. And sometimes those marketing terminologies are sometimes helpful.
Yeah, I would just add quickly that last point about, making sure that you choose people to write for you who are genuinely invested in your success, and give them the tools, give them, exactly what my colleagues have said, both James and Daniel, give them the information that they need to really build out your profile in their letter.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple of questions. One question is it okay to slightly edit a statement of purpose and send to another school? So in other words, can you take a statement of purpose and sort of use it across schools and just sort of change the names of who you want to work with and, what the school is and all of that stuff?
I would definitely indicate schools that I have applied to. I think it gets, I would say yes, I would list schools, and I would try honestly to apply to many schools because I think it gives certainly from the committee here in Harvard, it gives the sense that they are not the only fish in town and there are, this person is looking elsewhere, then increases your sort of your purchase, so to speak. So that's personally, I would say yes.
Yeah, I think on the question of if one of the questions is about you create a standard statement of purpose or something, and then you just kind of repurpose it for other applications. If it is done in a way where it's just sort of plugging in names, changing the names and everything else is the same, it might be obvious to the people reading the application that it's a generic statement. So some of it is going to be repeated, of course. I mean, your kind of statement about what kind of research you want to do, what your experiences are, all of that is going to be probably the same across the board. But the area where you really talk about why this university, why do I want to work with these people, that's the area that you need to, you really kind of adjust and tailor and think deeply about, because that is the area that it's going to be really obvious to people if it's just like, oh, this is an excellent, so-and-so is an excellent scholar that I want to work with, period. That's a generic statement that's not going to resonate, right? So thinking about, what specifically about that program excites you.
Great. So next question, and this was specifically for Harvard's African Studies program, but I think it can apply to a lot of universities that have a master's in whatever the field is, and then go on to the PhD. So can one receive a master's degree on the way to the PhD? And can some of the panelists sort of explain that process, and also maybe give some advice on how to go about sort of navigating that?
I guess I should. The short answer is yes, you can. I think you come in, the length of time that you do the PhD allows you to do that. And not just you can receive a master's in whatever field you think is relevant for the PhD, as it is as a focused study and as part of the PhD. So I think it's all about making a case for it, why you want to receive the master's and why it's relevant as a step towards the PhD, beyond just the degree for degree's sake. And I think there are many of our students here who go on to have masters of a particular African language, a master of law, or what have you, and they make a case for how it connects and why that is important. So I think that the program itself is very flexible to allow for a master's, or even if you want to have it in a dual field like anthropology and African studies, you can totally do that.
I'll jump in here and say that most of the American programs are MA PhD combined, right? This is actually one of the justifications for it being a much longer program than, say, in the UK or elsewhere, where you just have just a PhD program and you're expected to get the master's before the program. Having said that, most research universities that have the MA PhD combined do not consider students who are applying just for the MA. Many of them don't offer terminal MA in the PhD field. There are lots of universities that do offer both. So, I mean, that's one thing to look at, is the university offering a terminal MA, or is it an MA PhD combined program? If it's an MA PhD combined program, then you can, if you're going through the program and you decide, year 2 or whatever, year 3, that this isn't for you and you want to leave, then you would leave with a master's degree, assuming you had fulfilled all of the requirements for the master's degree in that program. But anywhere where they don't have a terminal MA, they're not going to accept an application specifically for a master's degree. But I think what Daniel is also talking about is, if you're saying, oh, I'm applying to this PhD program at Harvard, but I'm also interested in a master's in law or education or whatever, African studies, which is offered at the university in another program, that makes, that is certainly something that an applicant might want to do. If I was looking at an application like that, though, I would be like, well, how are they going to, that's a lot of requirements that they have to fulfill. It's a lot of work, but if they have a clear plan about how they want to do that, I think that would make sense.
Hi, sorry, I got internet issues. But I was just going to say on the master's question, I agree with what everyone is saying, but I also think that a PhD can sometimes be an endurance test depending on your field. And I think that one can also gain a sense of accomplishment by having, it's not clear that finishing a PhD is always the best thing for everyone, but a master's can be a platform for you to pivot to something else. And if you're in the right program, that would also have been funded. So I think that, things change, your life changes, you get older, you become less or more risk averse as you get older or not. I think that your master's is something to consider, especially I know people, they stop at the master's and they continue something else, maybe even in the same school, they maybe went to law school or something else, like, your ambitions can change and your opportunities can change. So I don't think it's a bad thing. It actually is something that can
Thank you. Okay, so we will try to answer a couple more questions. So sort of as a follow-up question to that, are there any advantages or disadvantages of changing your discipline at the MA or PhD level? And maybe, that varies in flexibility in terms of changing discipline at that level, based on whether you went to a terminal MA program or into a PhD, let's say in history, right? But, sort of as an additional question to that, what are some of the, I guess to add to that question, what are some of the reasons why you would stop at an MA versus continuing to a PhD, and how do you sort of evaluate that as part of that question of advantages and disadvantages?
I think to begin with, please, yeah, go ahead.
No, go, Daniel.
Go ahead. No, I think I spoke earlier, James. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I was just going to take a very brief stab and say, if you get to a point in the master's where you have rightly evaluated things and concluded that this is not for you, I don't think there should be any problem about just getting out of the program. I know there's this talk about stigma and all of those things when people quit their PhD program. But the thing is, people will not run your life for you. It's basically what you want. I think it was Shakespeare who said, man, know thyself. You need to get to a point where you actually know what you want to do. And again, going back to all of those ideas about the scholarly identity, if halfway through the program, I realized that this is not for me, I really do not want to become an academic, I don't think I should continue the program, therefore. Then, of course, we talk about the precarious job market. We talk about so many things out there. Based on all of those things, I already think I am more better positioned to work as some kind of maybe museum program coordinator, and I do not need a PhD for that. Why would I continue the PhD? So for me, it's about, rightly evaluating things and understanding what you want, not what the program wants, not what your friends who have decided to continue the program want, but what you want. Having said all of that, let me close by saying there are a lot of sociological materials out there that suggest that people are actually choosing grad programs in North America and outside their home countries, not because of any vested academic interest, but because they just want to get out of the country. I think a panel such as this should account for those kind of factors and try to, point people in the right direction. Also, we need to be sincere with ourselves. If I left Nigeria because, I have and to be honest, you guys probably know there's a lot of people who have PhDs currently in Nigeria, for example, who are starting PhDs all over again in North America. Now, it speaks to the system on the one hand, but on the other hand, it also, points to this reality of people who just want to use a graduate education to get out of the country. Now, they're outside of the country, they have done another master's, and they're like, do I need to go all the way? They've sat down to evaluate the situation and say, I really think I need to go all the way because the PhD I had, my first PhD, solid as it is, can be much better. So they want to do it. So there are different reasons. This thing is a systemic issue on the one hand, but there's also a lot of personal, a lot of personal angle to this. And I think we should put that in mind as much as possible. So it comes back to this particular person, this individualized, decision they have to make and say, what do I want for myself? What is best for me?
The way I look at it is that people are in search of a better life, whether that is in the academia or not. And so even Lagosians trying to study abroad, I think if you are half ambitious as a Nigerian growing up now, you're looking at not just, you know, universities in Nigeria, you're certainly looking at, you want to be the best, you want to study in the best places in the world. And it's just simple. It might lead you to look outside. I think your point is absolutely important. And I think, especially if we want to contextualize it, students applying, say, for example, in Lagos and thinking, oh, you know, I want to relocate to Canada and I think education might be for a better life. And I think education might be the best way. Then you want to look at how many points do I get for a permanent residence if I apply for a PhD in Canada vis-a-vis a PhD in the US? What are the pathways to staying there and having a better life? And who knows the possibility? You might get into the program and realize that you're passionate. It could go the other way. It couldn't be just like you drop out. You can also come into the program and you have no intention of continuing, and you actually realize that you have a field you're passionate about and you actually want to be a PhD and go on to be an academic. I think the bottom line is about a quest for a better life and to improve oneself and develop one's capacity to aspire. And I think that is absolutely crucial when selecting a program. So it's not just the program itself, but looking at also, are you applying to a program that immediately you finish your degree, they're giving you 15 days to leave the country, versus a program that immediately you finish your degree, you have 3 years automatically to look for jobs and to test out the possibility of staying in that particular country. I think those are important. I remember, just very, very briefly, I had finished my PhD at Oxford in the UK, and I finished way earlier, or just below 3 years, in a visa that was like 5 years or so. That gave me a span. And within 10 days, I got a message that I had to leave the country. You know, it happened that I had lined up a postdoc at Penn in the US, but you know, it was still somewhat criminal because I had done my master's and PhD there. And even before I breathed, they had already got wind of the fact that I had finished my program, and I had 10 days to leave a country that I'd spent the last 6 years in. So I think that is important because you don't think about it's part of thinking about the end game as well, and making sure that nobody's breathing down your neck immediately you finish. You have some space to breathe and look at opportunities that could come your way. And one of those opportunities could be, oh, you want to work in the World Bank in DC and you end up staying there. So I think that's what I would say, absolutely crucial to look at visas and possibilities of staying in the country after. If that gives you a better life, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree, like with the actual pressures of real life and what it means to be able to live in the West versus living in Nigeria and other things. But to also answer the other part of the question, I don't think that there are particularly disadvantages to changing. I came to the humanities from the sciences. I was in engineering. So I would be an advocate for following the things that you are drawn to and seeing what you can make of it in that sense. Most of the disadvantages I experienced were from perception. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? And I had to find myself trying to justify what I was doing by simply exploring my interests. And what I found is that if you're lucky enough to be successful, people will create an origin story for you. You know, like people will say, oh, she's always wanted to do that, or he's always wanted that. Like people might not support you when you're trying things out, but if you find a way, if success happens to come, or the opposite of uncertainty happens to come to you, you will find that this becomes an interesting and complex backstory, rather than, like, people will not encourage you until there's something to encourage, and people might not understand what you're being drawn to. So I think that you can try, if you can try, you should try, as long as it's not going to sink you, as long as it doesn't destabilize your entire life. But I know from my own experience of coming into the humanities that many people were like, why are you doing this? But I think one can persevere and try different things, you know, so it's just so I don't see disadvantages from that are internal, because I think you should try what you want to try, given the opportunity.
This is all awesome advice I wish I had when I was applying to grad school. Yeah, I mean, I think this is really important. I mean, I'll just repeat that, you know, you want to apply for a program that makes sense to you, not just logistically, but is speaks to things that are deeply interesting and you know, something you find that you're passionate about, because it is a commitment. And if you get into that program and you decide, okay, I've done the first year or two of this PhD program, I could leave with a master's, or maybe I switch to another field. I know many students who've actually switched to different PhD programs and they've done fine. I mean, so this is, you know, you really want to be able to pivot, you know, don't commit just because you said I signed that paper 2 years ago that said I committed, right? You really want to do what's best for you, what's right for you. And you know, this graduate programs require a lot of investment and a lot of energy, but you have to be the one who's advocating for yourself and protecting yourself and not giving everything to the university.
Well, our time is basically up. Thank you all. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you for your great advice. I think I speak for all of us when I say that our emails are in the program, and please feel free to contact any of us if you have additional questions. You know, we are here to support everybody who is attending the conference and beyond. So thank you very much for everybody who attended. Thank you to the panelists, and I'm sure we will all see more of each other throughout the conference.
All right, take care, everyone. And
Thank you, everyone.
Clinton, I responded to your question in the chat. Bye, everyone. It was lovely to meet you all.
Good.
Bye.
And
Bye.
see
Thank
others.
you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, of course.